What's up, everybody, and welcome in to another edition of the Sit Down. As always, if you enjoy this video, please make sure you hit the like button and let me know what you think of today's discussion in the comment section below. If this video here on a Saturday gets to 1,000 likes, I will give one lucky commenter a cash prize. The quicker we get to 1,000, the quicker we pick the winner. If you're new around here, you just haven't done it yet, or you're living under a rock and seeing this video for the first time, I don't know what you're waiting for. Hit that subscribe button below now so you never miss another sit-down video. Today, ladies and gentlemen, we're going to get into another very interesting organized crime topic. And as we know with the mafia, the word depravity is always something that we would use to describe most of the things the individuals do on a daily basis. There's a lot of murder, blood, and deceit. We don't often talk about the more lighthearted people in the mafia, guys that were funny. They fit the bill of what a true gangster might look like, and ultimately had some pretty one-liners and funny stories along the way. The individual we're going to speak about today was called by one underworld source one of the most classic people he had ever come across in the world of the mafia. The story of a fairly little known Anthony Tony Green Urso. Next on Sit Down Shorts. Anthony Urso was born in July of 1936 in the Brooklyn neighborhood of Greenpoint. As we know with Greenpoint and Williamsburg for a lot of years was mob territory. If you know anything about the Sonny Black crew, which we'll get into, they were based in and around Greenpoint, Williamsburg at the Motion Lounge. John Sonny Franzese was from this area of Brooklyn for the most part. There was a lot of OC connection in Greenpoint. Now, for Tony Urso, very little is known about his early life. There would be one thing we would glean, though, from his early life. It was said that Tony Urso could not read or write. Even into the twilight years of his life, he would get other people to write documents, read documents for him. He was unable to speak. All he was able to do was speak. He could not write or read. Now, growing up, Tony Urso would quickly delve into the streets, really in his 20s and 30s. It was said that Tony Urso in his early years, really into his older years as well, was always a pretty well-built individual, good-looking guy, always dressed up, looked the part, was always super tan and worked out a lot. He was a well-built kid. And, you know, it's interesting in the stories that I'll tell you today about Tony Urso, the life that Tony Urso had. I don't always like to relate Sopranos characters to these individuals because, you know, occasionally we have to recognize that's a television show. But I did see a lot of very interesting similarities between Tony Urso and Paulie Walnuts, actually. And when you listen to this breakdown, you'll kind of understand why. Now, early in Tony Urso's life, he would meet Joe Saunders Camerano Sr. These two individuals would become associates in the Bonanno Crime Family. If you know anything about Joe Camerano, he grew up in Brooklyn and came up in Brooklyn. Both Camerano and Urso would become early associates in the very powerful Sonny Black crew of the Bonanno Crime Family. As we know, in 1979, Carmine Galante was offed, and the capo of Sonny Black, Mike Sabella, was essentially knocked down a peg, and Sonny Black would take over and get his own crew. Sonny Black would form a very formidable group out of Brooklyn that was very close with future boss Joey Massino. Now, for Sonny Black, he would have some real heavyweights in his crew, which included Benjamin Lefty Guns Ruggiero, Nicky Mouth Santora, Louis Haha Anastasio, and associates like Joe Camerano and Tony Urso. Now, Tony Urso really had kind of an interesting start to his career. Not only was he involved in the normal bookmaking, loan sharking, and extortion, but he became very involved with the world of Joker poker machines, which would really essentially make him a pretty rich guy towards the middle and end of his life. Tony Urso was somewhat close, and most of the people in this faction of the family were close with a longtime member of the Sonny Black and Bonanno crew, the guy with the glasses, Antonio Tomasulo. Tomasulo was incredibly powerful in the Joker poker machine business. From one machine per week, he was making 10 to 15 grand a week, and he had tens, if not hundreds of machines everywhere in Brooklyn. He was a very powerful dude. Tomasulo was born in the late teens and had been in the family for a long, long period of time, but he never rose above soldier. He was a big-time moneymaker who always had an envelope for the people above him. He was one of the more powerful people as far as moneymakers in the Sonny Black Napolitano crew. Now, by 1981, though, as we know with Sonny Black, he would have to face the wrongs of his involvement in the situation involving Joe Pistone, a.k.a. Donnie Brasco. I'm not going to go through the Sonny Black finish of his life, but if you want more on Sonny Black, you can listen to my video here on him. Sonny Black would be taken out, and it's really unclear as to who takes over his crew. One of the great secrets of the Bonanno family is who actually takes over the crew of Sonny Black when he is killed. A lot of people believe most of the crew would dissolve into the crew of Joey Massino, and this is where Tony Urso would meet Joe Massino. We have to remember that once Sonny Black is taken out in 1982, Lefty Guns, Nicky Mouse Santoro, Fat Tony Ribito, most of the people in the Sonny Black crew are actually indicted and get 15-year prison sentences. Included in that indictment was Antonio Tomasulo. So most of the people in the Sonny Black crew would essentially go into the Joey Massino crew. At that point, Joey Massino is a high-powered captain and essentially the mouthpiece of the family and acting street boss because Phil Rastelli is in and out of prison. This is where he meets Tony Urso, and Tony Urso would essentially become Joey Massino's driver and conduit into the streets. He becomes a very close confidant of Joe Massino. Now, what makes this important and makes Tony Urso interesting is he almost essentially wedges Joe Massino between Sal Vitale. It was very clear that in New York City, in the Bonanno family in this time, Tony Urso, who was an up-and-comer, and Sal Vitale did not like each other. And that's something that throughout their life, they would have to deal with. Now, Massino, as I said, is in control of the family at this point. And in late 1986, due to his relationship with Joey Massino, Tony Urso becomes a made member in the Bonanno Crime Family. He had said that he was made towards the end of 1986. Alongside him in the same ceremony, Thomas DiFiore would also become a made member in the family. Now, upon their induction into the family, they, like I said, kind of slotted into the crew of Joey Massino. Now, down the road, we'll talk about Tony Urso becoming a captain and who was involved in his crew. But I want to talk more about Tomasulo because once Tomasulo, goes to prison, he would actually die in and around the late 80s, early 90s after he suffered a very bizarre asthma attack once he got out of prison. The thing that I would mention about Tomasulo is he had a wide-ranging Joker poker machine business, and he needed someone to take that business over. In the late 80s, his son, Anthony Tomasulo Jr., would kind of slot in as an associate of his and run the operation. Now, once Tomasulo dies, the Mafia Code says that that is given back to the family and the family divvies up the spoils. And that's exactly what would happen. And this would wedge a major beef between Salvatore Vitale, who is now really the quasi-boss of the family because Joe Massino was indicted and on the run and ultimately would go to prison. Vitale is kind of the decision maker on the streets. He is the person that would divvy up this Joker poker business. Tomasulo is not a member of the family, so he has no issue here. The problem is he makes an issue out of it. He wants to bring a sit down. He wants control here. And what Tomasulo ultimately does is he threatens the life of Salvatore Vitale and the messenger that told Tomasulo that he needed to give the business up, Michael Cardello. Cardello was a soldier by this point or becoming one down the road as well. So essentially, Vitale realizes that I got to do something before this individual does something to me. Keep in mind, at one point, Vitali would meet with Brooklyn consigliere and heavyweight Anthony Spiro. Anthony Spiro would tell Vitali, quote, "You've got to kill this kid. You better do it. Get it behind you. God forbid he kills you. We all lose." Anthony Spiro was a wise man, and he knew the writing on the wall, and so did Sal Vitali. Sal Vitali realized that by having this associate mad and annoyed, not only would he have to deal with the repercussions of it, but he would also not have a very lucrative way of earning in the family. He could slot in some of his people to kind of take that racket over. In May of 1990, Sal Vitali would order the murder of Anthony Tomasulo Jr., and that would be approved by high-ranking members in the family alongside Vitali. Vitali would essentially instruct a hit team to take out Tomasulo. And in May 1990, that would exactly happen. Tomasulo's body was found in the rear seat of his car after he was shot multiple times. Involved in the murder was Anthony Urso, allegedly. It was said that Anthony Urso would have Tomasulo follow him to a warehouse that belonged allegedly to Francisco Cheech Navarro, a made member of the Bonanno family, and someone would kill him at that location. So Urso was on the hook, possibly down the road, for a conspiracy to commit murder, something that he would have to pay the piper for. Now, we do not exactly know who the shooter is. I talked to one person that was very connected to a lot of these people, and he would tell me that he probably believed that the shooter that day was probably Sal Vitali. Remember, Vitali copped to all sorts of things. I don't exactly know, and I don't remember reading in the testimony of anyone ever copping to this hit. But if you know, maybe you can drop it in the comments below. So for Urso, he would kind of be involved in divvying up the spoils of everything here down the road. Remember, keep in mind, by the early 90s, Joe Massino would get out of prison, and he would run this family with a fine-tooth comb. Once he returned from prison, Joey Massino would make Anthony Urso a captain in the Bonanno family. Now, in Anthony Urso's crew would include Thomas DiFiore, Louis Electric DeChico, and Philip and Anthony Navarra. Now, keep in mind, they are the, I believe, cousins of Francesco Cheech Navarra. They were a Zip family that would essentially become members of the Bonanno crime family. Things were good for Anthony Urso. And I want to get into some of the more lighthearted moments of Anthony Urso. I want to kind of talk to you about the kind of individual that he was. It was said that really deep into his 60s and 70s, Tony Urso would regularly go to the gym. He would tan essentially every day. He was very much well known to frequent many strip clubs in the New York area. And it was said that one of the places he enjoyed going in his 60s and 70s as a single man was a location of a nightclub inside a hotel in Garden City, Long Island. Several people would refer to it as Club G. I don't know the exact name of the place, but it was said that Tony Urso was a regular there. And at one point, he had worked with a bartender in some collections, and he, from what I understand, had tried to get that individual made at one point, an individual called Bobby. We don't exactly know who that is, but Tony Urso took care of everyone. It was also said that there's a wives' tale about Tony Urso. He would go to the Club G and would tell the DJ, hey, when I walk in, you better mention me, that I'm here. It was said that he was a pretty colorful individual. According to Bonanno soldier and ultimate capo Dom Cicali, he would say that, quote, Tony Urso thought he was God's gift to every woman who passed by. He'd make it so obvious, too. He'd look a woman up and down. He would say, though, that Urso was single in his late 60s and early 70s and that he, quote, looked good for his age. Tony was about 5'8" and weighed around 170 and was always hanging out of the gym, tanning bed, or nightclubs. So Tony Urso was kind of a wild dude. Like, he dressed the part, he looked the part, he was a powerful guy. Everybody talked very highly of how nice of a guy he was and made a lot of money. The younger women liked him. I'm sure we can imagine, I don't know this for sure, but it's probably likely, Tony Urso was always with a much younger woman. And I do want to talk about a pretty funny story that in a recent interview I did with Dom Chikali, he kind of talked a bit about, but I want to kind of talk more openly about what actually happened. During the early 2000s, which we'll get to, Tony Urso had been groomed to become the acting boss if Joey Massino would ever go away. In 2003, Joe Massino would be indicted by the federal government, and he would assert that he would make Tony Urso his acting boss. Now, in Joe Massino's testimony down the road, Joe Massino would talk openly that in making ceremonies during the early 2000s, he would always make sure he had not only Tony Urso, but also TG Graziano at those ceremonies. So they had kind of understood how to put them on and they could do them in the case that Joe Massino would go away. Joe Massino really trusted Tony Urso, and he believed whenever he went away, whenever that was, Urso could run the family for a period of time. Now, Dom Chikali would talk about during his induction in the family, he was running around with Vinny Basciano. At one point during the brief time that Tony Urso was boss, he would be summoned to a meeting with Urso in a parking lot of a strip mall. He would say that Urso would pull up in a Hummer that he had driven pretty regularly. He would say that Urso would get out of the car in skin-tight spandex shorts. I guess this was in the summer. Urso would jump out of the Hummer. Now, remember, he's in his 70s at this point. He jumps out as the boss, acting boss of the family, in spandex shorts and walking up towards the meeting, to which Chikali and Basciano essentially say, look at this fucking guy. This is the acting boss of our family. And they would say that they would walk to Urso and they were trying not to laugh under their breath. And during the walk over, Basciano would mutter under his breath to Dom Chikali, quote, look at his balls, like just in a funny kind of way. And that's the kind of guy Tony Urso said to be was. He was just this kind of really colorful guy who just didn't really care. The whole Don doesn't wear shorts thing didn't apply to Tony Urso. Tony Urso was a colorful dude. During his time as boss, which was a brief time, Tony Urso was really only boss for a matter of months, under a year, actually. Joey Massino would ultimately cooperate, but the first person to cooperate was Salvatore Vitali, and there was never any love lost between Sal Vitali and Tony Urso. In fact, at one point, Tony Urso would talk very openly about his disdain for Sal Vitali. Urso would say, quote, Vitali was my biggest enemy within the family, so much that on several occasions, he had tried to have me killed, bringing false accusations against me. These accusations were dismissed as ridiculous by Massino because he knew of the jealousy that Vitali had. He knew that I was a loyal friend to him. And that's the truth. Tony Urso was a lot more capable. He was a lot more trustworthy, and people in the family respected him a lot more than they did Sal Vitali. The problem for Tony Urso, though, he knew once Vitali cooperated, he was going to be at the top of the list for Vitali to spill his guts about. And that's exactly what Vitali did. Vitali would essentially say of everyone involved in the hit on Anthony Tomasulo. Now, during the brief time Urso was boss, he would have a diner meeting with the upper echelon of the family, including Joe Camarano Jr., James Tartaglione, and Vinny Basciano. The problem for Urso was Tartaglione was wired for sound, and he would pick up Tony Urso in a truly damning conversation that down the road would be the difference, really, I think, in what got Tony Urso off the streets. At one point in a heated conversation on September 13, 2003, Tony Urso would discuss the fact that he was sickened by the fact that Vitali had became a rat, quote, it's got to stop. Now this one's a rat. That one says, well, fuck it. He can do it. I can do it. Whoever turns will wipe your fucking family out. If you take one kid, I hate to say it, you got to do what you got to do. They'll fucking think twice. How would Sal feel if I killed one of his kids? It was a truly damning statement by Tony Urso. Now, we can surmise that Tony Urso was just annoyed. He was an old school guy. Would he actually kill the children of some of these people? Probably not. But this was pretty damning. In fact, at one point, Joe Camerano would quickly shoot it down and say, that's not going to happen. That's not how we do things in this family. And that you cannot do anything to hurt the family of these people. That's not what we do. But this was very damning for Tony Urso. Down the road, Urso would have to pay the piper. And look, most people in the Bonanno crime family would have to pay for their misguidings due to their relationships, not only with Sal Vitale, but with Joe Massino. For Tony Urso, he would ultimately be indicted in 2004 and would have to face the real possibility that he would die in federal prison. Tony Urso was a pretty old individual at this point, in his 70s. As I've said before, the testimony and cooperation of Sal Vitale is, in my estimation, probably the most destructive in the history of the mafia. Sal Vitale not only put a ton of people away, but it's the length of time he put most people in the Bonanno family away for. Over 20 people received 20 years or more from Sal Vitale's testimony. Tony Urso would ultimately be sentenced to 20 years in federal prison. In 2021, he would be released at the age of 86. He is said to be retired and living on Long Island. The good thing for the very colorful Tony Urso is he will likely die in his own bed, something that as a gangster you truly want. He made it through really not spending outside of his twilight years in prison. Was he the best earner ever in the family? No. He was a solid guy. He wasn't really known for violence. But the one thing that Tony Urso can say is that he was a loyal friend to the end. He never cooperated, and he was always very trustworthy. He's one of the spokes in the wheel that kept the Bonanno family turning. And I have to wonder what the family maybe would have been without him, because it's clear through history that this family did not respect or want Sal Vitale in a high-ranking position. And in the end, I think they trusted Urso more, and that really bothered Sal Vitale. Some of the other members of Tony Urso's crew would have to pay for Sal Vitale's behavior as well, including Louis DeChico, who would get 40 months in federal prison. Nicky Mal Santoro, who is a counterpart of Mr. Urso, he would get 36 months. Louis Haha would get 15 years. And most of these people are either out now or died in federal prison. But one thing we can say is Urso was a colorful guy. And I've always said the story involving the spandex is one of the funniest I've ever heard in the history of the mafia. I've always also said the Bonanno family is the most interesting. I urge you, if you're watching this video, like I said, hit that like button, hit the subscribe, and also go check out my Dom Cicali interview in my library. I'm going to post it at the end of this video so you can just click it. I think you'll enjoy it. It was the first of its kind, and I'm glad Dom gave me the exclusive. We'll see you next week here on the Sit Down.